2,300 hours, Baltic Sea. 6 Russian oil tankers cut off their AIS signals at the same time and moved through the darkness in complete silence. They believed they had disappeared from the map. But they were wrong. From the moment they left port, every course change, every movement, and every signal had been tracked by Finland's SOSA sonar network. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer adjusted its heading as its advanced targeting radar quietly focused on the convoy. Warning flares and signal bursts lit up the night sky. 2,000 feet above the water, a P-8A Poseidon swept across the area at Mach 0.78, its sensor suite already monitoring the ships for hours and recording every shift in behavior. This was not random. The tankers had entered an invisible net. In just a few more seconds, the Russian crews were about to make a mistake that could echo far beyond their own careers. Once the so-called Ghost Fleet realized its cover had been removed, Moscow activated a planned gray zone escalation in the center of the Baltic. In a sudden high-risk move, Russian boarding teams took control of a civilian fishing vessel, claiming it had crossed into restricted waters. Moments later, Russian transmitters filled international emergency channels with a misleading Mayday message, attempting to control the story and make NATO appear responsible. But the alliance response was not limited to statements or diplomatic pressure. It was a coordinated containment operation. From the west, 2 Swedish Visby-class corvettes raced across the Baltic at 37 knots. These were not ordinary ships. They were carbon fiber shadows built with sharp radar-absorbing angles that made them extremely difficult for Russian tanker sensors to detect. Powered by 18,000 horsepower of gas turbine force, the Visbys closed the distance in total electronic silence. Their Bofors deck systems were already linked to advanced tracking equipment, while their RBS-15 systems remained concealed behind stealth hatches, ready for a precise response if the situation crossed the line. At the same time, the Finnish Navy activated a fast maritime screen. Using live data from the SOSA sonar network, Finnish patrol craft moved toward the captured vessel. They brought more than speed and presence. They brought electronic disruption. Powerful GPS and radar interference systems went online, confusing Russian navigation and turning their advanced bridge displays into streams of useless noise. High above the scene, the P-8A Poseidon expanded its magnetic anomaly detection and multi-static sensor coverage, mapping the hidden underwater picture in real time. It became the central brain of the operation, sending high-precision targeting data to the USS Arleigh Burke. The American destroyer, driven by 100,000 horsepower of gas turbine power, moved into a blocking position. Its Aegis combat system shifted into a high-alert posture, tracking multiple contacts at once as the crew prepared for a rapid intercept. The trap was now fully set. The Russian convoy had entered the Baltic believing it controlled the game, but instead it found itself surrounded by a multi-domain net built from Swedish stealth, Finnish coastal intelligence, and American naval power. The stage was prepared for a confrontation where every second mattered. And the Russian crews were about to understand that the initiative no longer belonged to them. To the veterans and patriots who remember the hardest years of the Cold War, Moscow's methods may look familiar. But this time, those old pressure tactics were facing a digital barrier far more advanced than anything the 20th century ever produced. Looking at the power of the Arleigh Burke and the quiet precision of the Visby-class corvettes, do you think Russia is making a serious mistake by using old-style intimidation against 21st century technology? We want to hear your perspective. Tell us in the comments how this compares to the tensions you remember. Inside the dim, cramped bridge of the Russian tanker, a staged performance was already unfolding with cold precision. Moscow's operatives pushed a frantic Mayday call across international civilian frequencies, trying to take control of the global story before the facts could catch up. On the deck of the captured fishing vessel, Russian special teams began what looked like a carefully arranged rescue scene. But the reality behind the performance was very different. The civilian captain was being pressured to repeat a prepared statement, one designed to make it appear as if NATO had been running an espionage operation. At NATO headquarters, an experienced commander immediately recognized the pattern. It was an old Soviet-style tactic: create a crisis, control the camera angle, and accuse the other side before the truth has time to surface. Moscow wanted the world to see the alliance as the source of the danger, but this time they had overlooked one critical detail. They forgot about the eye in the sky. High above the Baltic, far beyond the freezing spray and dark waves below, the P-8A Poseidon held steady at 20,000 feet. Its twin CFM56-7B turbofan engines delivered smooth, relentless power, each producing 27,000 pounds of thrust and keeping the aircraft stable as a high-altitude intelligence platform. Inside the aircraft, its systems worked with quiet precision. The L-3 Harris MX-2OHD electro-optical sensor turret rotated smoothly beneath the fuselage, locking onto the scene below with remarkable clarity. From an altitude where the human eye could barely separate ship from shadow, the sensor zoomed in with stunning detail. As Russian state media prepared to release shaky footage designed to support its version of events, NATO command was already watching a clean 4K live feed. They could see the unit patches on Russian uniforms, the tension on the civilian captain's face, and the clear sequence of events showing that the pressure began long before the first emergency signal was ever transmitted. This was the new front line of the information contest. Not rumors, not staged footage, not the loudest broadcast, but verified data in real time. Every attempt to bend the story was being exposed before it could spread. Power in the Baltic that night was not about who could speak the loudest. It was about who held the clearest proof. The instant the truth was recorded, the USS Arleigh Burke moved to make sure Moscow's version of the story never reached the outside world unchecked. Deep inside the destroyer, 4 General Electric LM2500 gas turbines came alive, turning 100,000 shaft horsepower into a roaring surge of white foam. The 9,000-ton giant carved through the Baltic swells at 30 knots, closing the distance with calm, overwhelming force. But the real move was not physical, it was invisible. The commander authorized the activation of the AN/SLQ-32V6, one of NATO's most advanced electronic warfare systems. In a fraction of a second, the Arleigh Burke created a focused wall of electromagnetic disruption around the 6 Russian tankers. Satellite links faded, long-range radio channels collapsed, cellular signals disappeared. Onboard screens that had been moments away from transmitting a carefully staged narrative to Moscow now showed only one message: no signal. For the Russian crews, it felt as if the outside world had simply vanished. They had planned to broadcast their version of events in real time, but instead they were sealed inside a digital blackout. No reinforcements, no live feed, no message leaving the convoy. They were trapped inside the silence created by their own operation. While confusion spread across the Russian ships, the Phantom of the Baltic made its move. A Swedish Visby-class corvette, a masterpiece of carbon fiber design, slipped toward the seized fishing vessel with silent precision. Unlike traditional ships that churn through the sea, the Visby's water jet propulsion and low vibration systems allowed it to move with almost no visible wake. It was a 600-ton shadow, nearly absent from the Russian Zaslon M radar picture. The deck teams aboard the Russian tanker were watching for the large outline of an American destroyer. But they never noticed the Visby until it was almost beside them. At just 100 yards, the corvette revealed its Bofors Mark III system from its stealth housing. The Russian personnel, who believed they controlled the gray zone, suddenly looked up and saw a sleek, angular vessel standing over them like something from the future. They could not see clearly. They could not communicate. And now they were facing a ship they had never heard approaching. On the bridge of the lead Russian tanker, the air felt heavy with diesel fumes and electrical tension. The captain stared at his radar display, but it had become a useless green void. NATO's electronic cage had left his sensors blind. Then, through the mist, a massive dark silhouette appeared at a 45-degree angle. The Arleigh Burke was still advancing. On the NATO tactical network, a digital countdown reached the 90-second mark. The Russian crew could feel the vibration of the American turbines through the deck beneath their boots. This had become a 9,000-ton test of nerve. The American commander was pressing forward, trusting the strength of his ship and the discipline of his crew, while forcing the staged provocation to reveal its limits. But the true masterstroke was still hidden below the surface. Overhead, the P-8A Poseidon continued its slow circle, its CFM56-7B engines holding a steady rhythm above the Baltic night. Below, the crew released a multi-static field of SSQ-125 sonobuoys, creating an acoustic picture that sent a very specific message through the water. To Russian sonar operators, the sound was impossible to ignore. The pattern resembled the low-frequency blade signature of Virginia-class submarines operating somewhere beneath the surface. Whether real or simulated, the effect was immediate. The convoy was no longer thinking only about the American destroyer closing in from above the waves. Now they had to consider the possibility of unseen pressure from below. The psychological balance shifted in seconds. At the 45-second mark, the Arleigh Burke activated its long-range acoustic hailing system. A focused wave of sound rolled across the Russian bridge, shaking the glass and cutting through the noise on deck. The message came in both English and Russian, clear and impossible to misunderstand. Russian formation, you are creating a danger to navigation. Disperse immediately or prepare to be boarded under international emergency procedures. For the Russian crews, the pressure became overwhelming. Their sensors were unreliable, their communications were blocked, Their staged narrative had failed, and the American destroyer was still advancing. On the bridge of the lead tanker, the captain finally broke formation. He ordered full reverse. The engines coughed out a cloud of black smoke as the massive vessel groaned under the sudden deceleration. The Russian line collapsed. One by one, the tankers began turning to port in a rushed and uncoordinated maneuver, their hulls leaning heavily as each crew tried to clear the path of the American bow. What had been planned as a display of control had turned into a disorderly retreat. On the seized fishing vessel, the Russian boarding team understood what had happened. They were alone. Their communications had been cut off. Their version of events had been recorded in high resolution, and their escape route was closing. That was when the Visby-class corvette made its final move. After holding in near silence, the Swedish vessel accelerated on water jet propulsion and slid between the fleeing tankers and the fishing boat like a futuristic shield. Its Bofors system tracked the Russian positions with quiet precision. The message did not need to be spoken. The operation was over. The Russian team, realizing that their mission had been exposed and their path was blocked by a ship they had barely detected minutes earlier, abandoned the vessel. NATO forces secured the fishing boat soon after. The result changed the Baltic equation. NATO had not simply protected a civilian vessel, it had demonstrated that gray zone pressure loses its power when it meets an integrated defense network built on sensors, coordination, and real-time proof. Moscow's so-called ghost tankers returned to Kaliningrad not as symbols of strength, but as a convoy that had been outmaneuvered, isolated, and exposed. The Baltic had entered a new era, one where a single violation no longer ends with a quiet escort, but with the full reveal of outdated tactics against modern coordination. There is one important thing to say before we close. Some scenes in this story are dramatized and intensified for viewer experience. Certain actions are presented in a cinematic way and may differ from real-world procedures. But to the men who served on Gearing-class destroyers and Knox-class frigates, to those who watched the Soviet Navy when the world felt one step away from midnight, the deeper lesson is familiar. Technology changes, displays become digital, sensors become sharper, networks become faster. But the sea still demands the same qualities it always has: steady hands, calm judgment, and courage under pressure. Today's sailors may operate in a world of data links, satellites, and advanced sensors, but they still have to make hard decisions in moments where hesitation can change everything. Does this level of modern naval chess make you confident that the traditions of the silent service and the surface fleet are being carried forward? Your perspective matters. Share your stories and your wisdom in the comments below. And if you believe a strong navy remains one of the key forces standing between stability and chaos, hit the like button. Share this briefing so more people understand what is unfolding in the Baltic. Comment 1 to salute the sailors of the United States, Sweden, and Finland.